Hello, it's me, sat here in front of my bookshelves on the floor, Winter. Welcome to the video. So, as a writer and an avid reader, I firmly 110% believe dialogue has the power to make or break a book. And by going over some things that completely irk me about dialogue and completely ruin the book for me, to things that I genuinely love when authors do with dialogue, you will hopefully come out the other end being as passionate as I am about dialogue. Now, I know there are like a million great pieces of writing advice out there, especially having to do with dialogue, since dialogue is typically a pretty main component to any book. These 6 things I'm about to talk about are just things that stand out predominantly to me and are tips that I actively use in my own writing and make sure I am conscious of. So let's get into it. Alright, so we're gonna start things off by easing into it a little bit. I just want you to think about something. When was the last time you were having a conversation with somebody and you said their name? And I don't mean like the, hey, Frank, what's up, man? No, not the beginning, not like getting their attention, none of that. I mean like the two of you in a room, you've been talking for 15-20 minutes and you just say their name, like casually. I recently had to read a book for a class. It was randomly chosen, randomly assigned to me. It was a novel, and if you watch my last vlog, you'll see like the situation behind that. But the author, literally every single character did this. It wasn't even just one character. It's every single character, every conversation. They would just say each other's names randomly throughout. And I know what you're thinking, like, oh, that's not a big deal. That's kind of the point, okay? Because it seemed like the characters' names were just one of those words that you threw in that you weren't really supposed to like pick up on. He said, she said, that kind of stuff. But it was a name, and people's names, characters' names, should not be thrown around like that. Every single word in your story counts, and it needs to do something. By saying somebody's name, it's to get their attention, it's to draw emphasis. It's, oh, you're in trouble, or oh, I need to tell you something, or are you listening to me? So when you put someone's name in a conversation, it needs to mean something. It can't just be there. And for me, it's just jarring and pointless if you do it without a reason. Now, I've seen this sort of piece of advice before, but typically it's seasoned writers being like, oh, this is a sign of a novice writer. They say each other's names in the dialogue. I'm not gonna put it that way just because the author who wrote the book, who did this, is a professor of literature and has been writing for a while. So is it really novice writers that do this, like only? Tip, piece of advice number 2, slang. We get it, you're trendy, but slang dates the book so hard, and to read it in 10-15 years will be so cringe. There are some really good exceptions to this. I don't think you should cut out slang like altogether. One, if you're trying to date the period, use it, throw it in there. If you're trying to establish like a setting or a certain demographic, language where people say these things, it can be really immersive. But if 20 years, our children or whatever read a book with the word clout in it, they're gonna be like, what the hell? Like, no idea, just no idea what that means. I will say that a book that uses slang, and I guess it isn't really like slang, but uses language really well, is Villette by Charlotte Bronte. I'm reading it currently, and what I really like about it is that the main character is English, but she teaches at a boarding school where they all speak French. So sometimes thrown into the mix of dialogue, like characters will speak French at her, and she will just put the French text. So as a reader, either 1, you have to know French, or 2, you have to go and look it up to really fully understand what's going on sometimes. Tip, piece of advice number 3, do not say something that you can just show. There's a reason why show don't tell is drilled into every writer there ever was, every school child there ever was. Show don't tell. And I have 2 examples of this. The first one being J.K. Rowling. While she's problematic as a person, she knows how to tell a good story. Now, I'm not saying her writing is like amazing, phenomenal, but her storytelling is great. If you've ever read any of the Harry Potters, every time Harry sees something, experiences something, goes through something, and then he goes back to Ron and Hermione, she always puts like the sentence, Harry told them what he had seen. Done, you're good, you can move on and whatever. She doesn't have him recap his whole experience for us, the reader, because we just saw it. We don't need to see or hear about it again. Now, there is an exception where, let's say the character like retells something to somebody, but they change something or they add something that we didn't see, you know, or they omit something, because that can make for an interesting sort of plot storyline if you choose to really emphasize that. Alternatively, The Time Machine, I never finished it. I just could not get over the fact that the whole story was one guy telling what happened to him to, it was like a group of people or somebody else or whatever. Like, it was all in quotation. Now, yes, it was a story and he was recounting it from his experience. He said, you know, I did this, this, and this. But in my head, all I could picture was a guy sitting in a room just talking to somebody about this versus him talking to us, the reader. It would have been so much more immersive for me if we had actually experienced this with him. Hello. And that's why I just could not get through that book. It just infuriated me. Tip number 4, sometimes it's all about what a character doesn't say versus what they do. It's okay to not say anything. One, not only is it realistic for somebody to just be quiet, but have like this crazy narrative going on in their mind, or just refusal of talking. And to me, silence can be just as strong of a form as communication. Alternatively, point number 5, long, rambling, just blocks of sentences can also have such a big impact. One, it's realistic. I mean, people can talk in long, rambly sentences if we're stressed, if we're scared, if we are trying to drive something home. You know, sometimes in tense situations, we don't pause for a breath. We don't use perfect grammar. And having to physically read somebody ramble on and on and on with like no or little punctuation is exhausting as a reader, but it brings you that much closer to the character and what they're feeling at that moment. Again, this is definitely like used for effect, so it should be used sparingly. It shouldn't, you know, be an excuse to just kind of ramble on and not use perfect grammar or punctuation, but it's a really great use to emphasize like really tense situations. And my last piece of advice, tip number 6, arguably the most important I could give anybody, is that dialogue should seem realistic without being realistic. One book comes to mind. Again, I couldn't finish it. I couldn't. Throwing a little shade out there to, you know, the poor author. The book's Supermarket. It was on like the bestsellers list. It was on all of the Barnes & Noble like must-read tables in what, 2019, I think. I couldn't. From the actual inner dialogue of the main character to how all the characters spoke to each other, it felt like somebody was orating the book, just talking into a microphone and it just spilling out onto the page. Not only was there uses of like slang or whatever, but it was just so like the words held no weight because it was just how we talk in everyday life. The next time you have like a conversation with your friends or coworkers or whatever, in the back of your mind, think about what you're saying and how like probably unimportant it is versus the conversations that are really deep and actually have importance, but they're all still just covered in fluff. And I'm gonna go back to a point I made earlier, but every single word in your book counts. And dialogue especially, because people pay attention to it. Like they will skim like long chunks of setting up the scene, inner monologue, that kind of stuff. But when someone starts to talk, and when characters are having a conversation, you pay attention. There is very little skipping of that. And while we're on the subject, prose. When was the last time, this is a nice little writing exercise, write down your stream of consciousness. Just as things just come to mind, just write it down. Imagine putting that into a book and that book getting published and people having to read it. And those are my 6 pieces of advice for you as a writer, as a reader. And you know, the great thing about writing and any skill really is that you can improve. You can improve by expanding your knowledge on the subject, by doing the thing that you're trying to improve on. The more you do something, the better you get at it. And the more aware of the things that you know you can improve on, the better chance you have of improving on those things. I don't know if that made sense. But anyways, that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching. Good luck with whatever writing project you are working on. All of the links to my stuff will be down below, and I'll see you later.